You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this coming Sunday, May 19th, is a special Sunday. Not only is it probably graduation Sunday in a lot of congregations, but it is Pentecost Sunday. And so, Zach, as you think about Pentecost, what comes to mind for you?
I love Pentecost. It's one of my, I don't know. There's a lot of favorite Sundays in the year. But Pentecost seems to hit different outside of Easter and Christmas and some of the other bigger Sundays that we do. Because it kind of we've, over the last 8 years, talked a whole lot about the dog days of summer on this podcast. And Pentecost just really leans into here's kind of some freshness and beginning to this season that's about to be really long until we get back to Advent. But I love the story of podcast of Pentecost. Too many P's. It's just a great storytelling story. You've got the disciples and the people that followed Jesus back in the upper room, and wind begins to come through and it shakes the room that they're in, and then there's tongues of fire above everybody's head, and then they go out and begin to preach and teach in all of the languages. And my favorite thing is the response of the people. Some of them were amazed, and others were like, these guys are drunk. And Peter's response is, it is 9:30 in the morning. We are not drunk. But it just sets up the early church so well in the passion, in the call that they feel to go out and now without Jesus and with the Holy Spirit to share God's love and grace and heal and preach and teach in all of the ways that Jesus taught them, and then some, all under nothing around them has changed. It's only been 50 days since Easter, and so Jesus's death and resurrection are in full memory and are very fresh. The danger, I mean, that's why they're still in the upper room. There's still danger and fear around their own arrest and ramifications of that. I mean, it's just so much, and they just get out there and they finally go do the thing that Jesus told them to do, and do it in such a way that it continues on and continues to disrupt and go against the grain of the society and culture of the day in a way that brought hope to people. And so I don't know, there's just so much about Pentecost that I like, and I get to play with fire, so that's always fun.
I put in a request this year to get a confetti cannons, and I was denied. I wanted confetti cannons because what a great way to show the power of the Holy Spirit than by confetti cannons.
Yes.
And for my church members that are listening to this show, I didn't really do that. I really want to do that. But I also know that spending money on confetti cannons is not great stewardship of money.
Not good stewardship.
And I definitely believe in that more than anything.
But if somebody would like to donate a confetti cannon or a t-shirt cannon to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it.
Yes. Or those fire things that they use at like the NBA games, that have the fire that like come up, like that would be really cool. Or let's just bring some cupcakes and say happy birthday, church. Like I could do that too. I love Pentecost. I love Pentecost for kind of almost exactly the same reasons why you did. And I don't know what we talked about in 2018 when we did a show called Pentecost, but I'm sure we talked about some of the same things.
Right.
But for those of you that don't know, the story of Pentecost can be found in the book of Acts, chapter 2. What's fun about this is that there's a whole section that Zach and I agree that does not have to be read, and that's when
That's
you
right.
name the names of the towns of the people that were there, because those are not fun names to read. If you don't believe me, go look at Acts chapter 2, starting around verse 9. It's not that those are not important, it's just they're hard to say.
They are.
Uh, and you know what's really funny? When I think of this text, I always remember this was the text that I drew to have to read in preaching class.
Of course you did.
And it was literally drawn on a hat. And so of
Yep.
course the dyslexic has to read these names. And of
Yep.
course this makes it even worse for me. And it was a really good telltale sign that I probably have a reading issue. And I'm very thankful for my preaching professor helping me to understand those issues. But when I think of Pentecost, two things always come up for me. First, it's the beginning of this discipleship's journey, the disciples' journey of literally putting rubber to the road for Jesus, where they're really, really living out their faith in a way of that's showing what they're believing and kind of where they're headed. And I think sometimes we forget we the reading in the lectionary stops at 21, but I always like what happens at like kind of in the latter part, like towards the end of Acts, like Acts 2:42, where they pull together
Mhm.
their resources and they do all the things the church is about. If you want to know what the church really should be about, Acts 2:42 really is to me the space where it does, where the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, so they listened to what the disciples and all of them had to say, and they brought it to their community. They shared meals and their prayers, and when we think about that, it's that building of community that then led them out. They didn't.
Mhm.
What happened? I always say this every year. What happened in the upper room didn't stay in the upper room. They didn't say their amens and their benedictions, shook hands, and then went about their way. They went out and engaged the communities and helped change the world for God's kingdom to come and happen then out of this moment. Like it
Right.
is the starting point of really the movement of Jesus.
Mhm.
Not that what Jesus did wasn't important. It lays the foundation for all that,
Right.
but where the rubber hits the road for the disciples is taking what Jesus taught them to the streets.
Right.
And they do that by this inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I know that you've probably been talking about it ad nauseum with your church,
Mhm.
but I feel like that we don't talk about the Holy Spirit enough.
Mhm.
And I have no Pentecostal roots whatsoever, but I do. I mean, Methodism does have roots in Pentecostalism in some ways, but I do believe that we should really be willing to be led by the Spirit. And here in the story today in Acts 2, we see Peter, like you said, answering the bell. Like people were just like, oh, they're those crazy people up there in that upper room that they're drunk. And
Yep.
Peter's like, man, it's it's not even noon yet. What are you talking about? Like, I
Right.
mean, I know he says more, but
Right.
and I think for the church, how we can take this today, I think as the United Methodist Church, as we're entering into a new season, a new life, I think we need to dig into this a little more and ask ourselves, what does it mean to really be led by the Spirit? What does that mean? Where does that take us? Like, how can we share things together, and how can we work together? Because obviously, working together is important. It's part of a big thing in the story is that they come from everywhere, and they agree to work together to go out into the world to share the good news. And I
Yeah.
think that is something definitely we can learn from it today. And I definitely think as we move forward as United Methodists, ask ourselves, what does it mean to be led by the Holy Spirit? I think that's something definitely to wrestle with.
Yeah. I mean, the early church is ingrained in doing life and faith together. That's what they come together to do. And yeah, we've been talking ad nauseum about the Holy Spirit the last few weeks. And we'll continue to. And that's how I started the sermon series is we don't talk about this enough, and we should, because as Wesleyans, the Holy Spirit is ingrained into who we are. I mean, and as United Methodists, right? The cross and flame, the flame is the Holy Spirit, right? That is the wind and fire of Pentecost that we identify with. And yeah, for whatever reason, we just don't. we don't talk enough about it, and we should.
I think part of the reason why we don't is because it's a scary thing,
Yeah.
meaning that it will take us places that we were not ready to go
Hmm.
or prepared to go,
Hmm.
or uh having lived in Western Oklahoma and dealt with tornadoes before, violent wind is scary.
Violent wind is scary,
uh,
but it's also moving
but it
and
is moving, and it's
refreshing when
replenishing.
it's not
Yeah,
has sand in it, right?
yeah.
But that's the thing, like you said, it moves us. It moves us um, to go out from whatever four walls we're within and be present and to show up where the Holy Spirit is already at work in the world around us and share God's love and grace and help those who are in need and be present with those who are grieving and just um, do exactly what Peter and the disciples and all of those did in showing up places that were unexpected and doing the things that Jesus taught. That that's that's where we are. We're called to go and do.
And can we also agree not to be afraid? Like, it took a lot of guts for them to do this.
Hmm.
It took a lot of guts for them to gather in the room. It took a lot of guts for them. Like, we need to acknowledge that, like, I think sometimes we don't talk about the fear that we face
Hmm.
to live out our faith. I think sometimes we just say, "Oh, just accept Jesus or live like Jesus, and everything's gonna be okay. There's nothing to be afraid of." When really the cost is high. Like, Jesus
Hmm.
reminds, like, I don't know, we're getting ready to do the Gospel of Mark. So I've been reading the Gospel of Mark,
Sure.
and to be reminded of the cost is high,
Yeah.
that's there. I think that that's something that we must consider. I
Hmm.
also think that we have to be attuned um, to the words. Like, and if I were preaching, well, actually, I think I am preaching this text on Sunday. But if I were really, like, if this wasn't part of something else I was doing,
Hmm.
I would read the Ezekiel text as well that goes
Yeah.
along with this for the lectionary this week, of reading dry bones,
Hmm.
and seeing how God's breath can really revive something when it allows. Like, it's really, you got to let it in.
Hmm.
And I think that that's the hard thing. And obviously these people in this upper room did that. They
Hmm.
allowed the Holy Spirit to work on them and through them. And I think sometimes too we forget that when we allow God in, it's not just to work on us, but it's also to work through us. I think
Right.
sometimes there's a lot of focus on the in us part, that we forget that what goes in us comes out of us.
Yeah.
And so to let the Holy Spirit in means also that we let the Holy Spirit out, and maybe we be the Spirit for someone else as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. And Peter and John, especially because we have the most stories about them post Pentecost. Um, we see that through them. Peter especially. I mean, in the Gospels, Peter's kind of the guy asking all the questions and not always getting it. And the one that Jesus points at the most to be like, dude, we're come on. And then we see Peter turn a corner with Pentecost and the Holy Spirit and this bold courage that he has to go out and do the things. Not that the fear is probably not there, like that doesn't go away, but he has the courage and the boldness to know that he's not alone doing this, that God is with him in these moments and grabs hold of that. And like you said, doesn't keep it in, but lets it out and lets it work. Yeah, I Pentecost is such a cool story. If you're reading it, just to read it. If you're reading it to preach it, man, read well into chapters 4 and 5, just to see where the Holy Spirit moves throughout the early church in those early days.
Well, and I think that's the key. And we've already said this, and it's just something I literally say this every year. What happens in the upper room doesn't stay in the upper room. And we have to acknowledge that. And
Hmm.
really, that's how the church should be. What happens on Sunday shouldn't just stay on
Doesn't
Sunday.
stay here. Yeah.
I think that that's something that we are missing the mark on that. And to be able to lean into that a little more is, I think, key and
Hmm.
helpful.
Yeah.
So, Zach, where have you seen the Holy Spirit at work around you this week?
Um, ok- all over the place. Because we're talking about the Holy Spirit, my congregation, it's been really fun because I'm asking ad nauseum all throughout sermons on social media, just when I see people, when we're doing Bible studies, in and out of the church, where do you see the Holy Spirit at work? And I'm not having to ask the question anymore. I'm starting to have people come up and be like, I got to tell you where I see the Spirit. I got to tell you where, and just sharing stories. And I love that. It's one of my favorite things when people share how God is at work in their lives, and I don't have to prompt it. I don't have to ask for that. And so I think that's really cool. One, I think that shows a lot of the work we're doing here to build relationships and be in community with each other, but that that people are noticing where the Holy Spirit is at work in their lives, or maybe they weren't seeing it or aware of it, or taking time to slow down and go, oh, it's right there. That's where God's at work. And I don't know. I think that's really, really cool. And I've seen it, I don't know, I've probably had a half a dozen experiences since Sunday, or conversations since Sunday, of people going, hey, Pastor, here's where I saw it this week. And that brings me a lot of hope and joy.
I was really waiting for you to break out into song and say, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart.
We don't have the royalties for that.
It may be common. It may be it may be old enough now that it may not be an issue. I think for me, so we did an amazing thing on Sunday. We did not flood. Meaning that on Sunday morning in worship, we had a substantial rain coming out, which doesn't happen all too often here, but it rained enough to find where our leaks were in our roof in our church in the sanctuary, which provided for some fun times. But that wasn't really the important part of the service. What the important part of the service was when we blessed the backpacks.
Mhm.
And it was a lot of fun watching people come up. Like, that was a new tradition that I started last year, is having people come up and hold the backpacks as we do the blessing. And that was powerful to see that in action, but then to also see the food that we had collected for our Mother's Day food pantry drive that we do every year.
Mhm.
See those two things happen in succinct and very successfully was just overwhelming and very powerful and inspiring, in all honesty. And so, definitely it was really fun to see as well. And there has been a sense of renewal here in a lot of ways of a shared focus of sharing God's love and light with our community and beyond. And that's just been a really cool thing to see as it's played out over the last
Mhm.
several months. So
Nice.
So I want to encourage our listeners to check out some of our old stuff. You can do that by going to beardedtheologians.com. You can check us out there. We've got a lot of great content up there. We'd also like, one of the things that you can do to help us is share our podcast with friends and family, and then also rate us 5 stars, write a funny review. That's all we ask. But that helps also get our stuff out there as well. And don't forget, you can also buy some items for those bearded people that you feel like need some Bearded Theologians items, or great giveaway gifts at various things that you may have going on this summer. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.